Good evening, and welcome to the Village's third referendum implementation public meeting. I am Meredith Joya, and I am the Communications Manager for the Village of Skokie. Over the past year, a team of Village staff members and outside experts in election law and district mapping have been developing a plan to implement the 3 citizen-initiated referendums approved during the November 2022 election. To my left on stage are members of that team. For many of you, they are now familiar faces, but in case any of our audience are new to these public meetings, I would like to introduce Village Manager John Lockerbie, Jason Geisinger and Scott Euler, attorneys from the law firm Klein, Thorpe and Jenkins, and mapping expert Peter Kretikos. There we go. Tonight, they will be reviewing the process from the beginning and sharing what is intended to be the proposal that will be presented to the Village Board next month. After the presentation, we will once again accept public comments from any audience member that wishes to share feedback. Thank you all for being here, and now I'd like to turn it over to Manager Lockerbie.
Thank you, Meredith. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Lockerbie, the Village Manager. It's good to see you this evening. I just wanted to highlight how we got to this evening. The referendums, the 3 were approved, the citizen-led referendums were approved in November. Following that, the village is responsible for implementation. And so we got to work understanding the process and doing some research. We distributed a request for qualifications and open solicitation for experts. Solicited a number of companies and then picked the individuals that you have been introduced to this evening. In addition to that, we have a number of employees from the village that have been involved. You've met Meredith, our communications manager. Patrick Dignan is in the room, our director of communications and community engagement. Our assistant finance director, Mike Alexic. Alex Franz, our management analyst here on the front row, Nick Wyatt, the assistant village manager there in the back. And so we have been working, putting together the proposal. The first public meeting was back in August, and the intent of that meeting was really to be a 101, if you will, of mapping. And so the intent was to solicit any input from the community prior to doing any drawing of the districts. And then we came back with a second meeting and in September and presented the proposal for implementing 2 of the referendums and then the 4 or a number of maps for the 4 districts. And then this evening, we're coming back with kind of the final proposal for your comments. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you, Meredith, for the introduction. I'm going to walk through the proposed implementation plan for the 3 referendum questions that were passed at the November of 2022 meeting. Now, the first referendum question called for the implementation of a system of nonpartisan elections. The implementation for this would include amending the village code to set forth that Skokie will be conducting nonpartisan elections going forward. What does it mean to conduct a system of nonpartisan elections? A nonpartisan election system generally prohibits candidates from listing any political party affiliation on their nominating papers, and no political party affiliation will be listed on the ballot. That is a strict prohibition. What a nonpartisan election system does not prohibit is for candidates to get together and coordinate their campaigns, fundraise together, coordinate their platforms, or receive support from political parties. Now I'm going to go back before we go into the next referendum question. I'm just going to make a brief note about the role that the primary election plays within this nonpartisan election system. So previously in the village, candidates filed for the general election in April. Under a nonpartisan political system, all candidates file for the primary election in February, but a primary election would only be held in the event that the number of candidates who file nomination papers is more than 4 times the number of seats that are up for election. So what this would mean, for instance, for the village president office, the mayor's office, it would be, since there's one position available, if 5 candidates filed nomination papers for the primary election, then a primary would be held to whittle the number of candidates down to 4. And that same calculation would be used for the trustee positions as well. Now, the second referendum question calls for biennial elections and staggered terms. Now, when we were creating this system of implementation, our task was to obviously put a system in place where there are staggered 4-year terms of the trustees, meaning some trustees would run at one biennial election and some trustees would run at the other. And this system will be put in place for the 2025 election cycle. Now, for Skokie to implement this system, we've introduced, as you can see up here on the screen, an election schedule where a specific group of trustees will be up for election every 2 years. Initially, some trustees will serve staggered 2-year terms serve 2-year terms to stagger, to begin the staggered system. In staggering the terms, we also needed to account for the hybrid system mandated by the third referendum question, where 2 trustees will be elected at large and 4 trustees are elected by district. Now, in creating this election schedule, we considered the following factors in putting this together. First, we had to acknowledge that the mayor and the clerk are unaffected by the referendum questions, which means that they're each going to be up for office for a 4-year term at the 2025 election. And that's why you'll see down here at the bottom of the screen for the 4-year terms, you see the mayor, clerk, and the 2 trustees at large. Next, we considered that the hybrid statutory systems in Illinois generally provide that the at-large trustees be elected at one biennial election and those elected by district at the other election. So you'll see here in the schedule, we've put the district-based trustees and the at-large trustees in a different schedule. We also looked at the way that terms of office are generally staggered under the Illinois Municipal Code, which is intended to promote balance in the biennial election so that an equal number of candidates are up for election at each biennial election to the extent possible. Finally, we considered the objectives of the referendum question, including the continuity of governments and the retention of historical knowledge that staggered terms are generally intended to address in putting this together. Based on these considerations, we believe that the following election calendar, which you see up here on the screen, would be a fair, balanced, consistent with statutory election systems under Illinois law, and accomplish the fundamental objectives of this referendum question of creating biennial elections with staggered 4-year terms for our village trustees. Now, just to review very quickly, what's going to take place at the 2025 election, you'll see that the district-based trustees will be up for 2-year terms in 2025, and the mayor, clerk, and the trustees at large will be up for the 4-year terms. And again, these 2-year terms for the district-based trustees are necessary to kickstart the staggered system of holding our biennial elections. And then in 2027, the district-based trustees would be up again for election for 4-year terms at that time. And then the mayor, clerk, and the trustees at large would not be up for election because they would be in the middle of their terms that began in 2025. And then finally, in 2029, we would have the mayor, clerk, and the 2 trustees at large up again for election for 4-year terms. And then the district-based trustees would not be on the ballot at that election because they would be in the middle of their terms that began in 2027. And before we turn it over to Peter to talk about the last referendum question involving the creation of the 4 trustee districts, I just wanted to make a brief note about the authority under which the referendum questions were placed on the ballot. And the 3 referendum questions that were placed on the ballot were done so under the home rule provisions of the Illinois Constitution, which allows for the altering of the village's form of government and a change in the manner in which officers are selected. The referendum questions did not call for the adoption of any specific statutory form of government provided for under Illinois law. The home rule provisions that I just discussed of the Illinois Constitution provide authority to adopt by referendum forms of government that do not strictly conform with the statutory forms of government that are provided for under Illinois law. And it was under this authority that the referendum questions were placed on the ballot. Now, as I indicated, the final referendum question deals with the creation of a hybrid system of government whereby 4 of the 6 trustees are elected from districts, 2 elected at large. And so at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Peter to discuss the creation of the districts.
Thank you. I had to make sure I didn't fall off the stage. Good evening, everybody. So we're going to talk a bit about the, what do I do here? Here we go. We're going to talk about the design of the districts. I just want to remind you that we started out with some general principles that we thought that were appropriate for Skokie in terms of, how these districts should be configured. First of all, is the constitutional requirement of 1 person, 1 vote, which means essentially that to the best of our ability, we try to make sure that the populations of the 4 districts fall within an acceptable margin. The courts have generally ruled it's plus or minus 5% from the ideal, but it's better to get closer if you can. And we have, we'll go into that in a minute. They need to be compact and contiguous. Contiguous is pretty easy to understand, and that is that no donut holes, and then the district, starts at one end, and then when you finish drawing the line, it attaches to the other side. Compact is sometimes in the eye of the beholder. Generally speaking, the people get offended if it starts to look like a salamander or an amoeba. And we try to avoid that unless there are other mitigating factors such as issues around the Voting Rights Act, where we're attempting to accommodate a protected minority. And then going beyond the sort of the 2 basics, we tried to center the map in the village with the idea that the center has a sense of shared identity. That's sort of a fancy way of saying that we looked at different configurations, and the idea that Skokie functions largely in quarters, in quadrants, makes good sense. It's the way the fire stations are distributed. You have 3, and they're in 3 different parts of Skokie in 3 different quadrants. Garbage collection is done generally on quadrants. The police patrol processes are generally done within quadrants. There are lots of things that occur in Skokie that naturally fit that sort of pattern, and we thought that made good sense to try to accommodate that. We try to follow major thoroughfares, boundaries, or other other physical or jurisdictional factors. And so going down main roads, not going down alleys, things of that nature. In terms of communities of interest, that's, again, it's a function of really the community saying what sort of binds a neighborhood together. We used as a proxy at the beginning school districts. That was a function of just understanding how school districts operate, how parents and families, are connected through their local schools. And even if you don't have children in the schools, just, there's the, I'm a proud parent of somebody who's a Husky or whatever. And those signs dotting the neighborhood, it does give a sense of identity to the community. And so we started with that, but we weren't exclusive to that. And we weren't able to follow through entirely because some of the districts are, well, one district's too big. It actually exceeds the size of a trustee district. And the other is that once you start getting in the middle, you start dividing some districts up. We were concerned that we didn't want to put residents on opposite ends of the village in the same district because they didn't have anything to do with each other. So, if you live along McCormick, and the relationship, the identity that you have in terms of who your neighbor is not the person who lives on the other side of Eden's Expressway, as an example. And so what we wanted to do, they're all Skokie, but it's different neighborhoods, it's different environment, different travel patterns. And so we were cognizant of this issue and didn't want to have districts that extended the entire width or the entire length of the village. We try to observe neighborhood contiguities as best as possible. The one example that I've used in my head is there's a neighborhood that just north of Memorial Cemetery, Memorial Park. There's cemetery to the south. There's parkland to the east. The only connection it has to any other residential area is to the west. And so trying to, designing a district so that in effect, they're cut off from the nearest neighborhood just didn't make any sense. But there are other places that we looked at that we tried to honor that principle as well. And then finally, we didn't want to isolate communities set apart by Eden's Expressway or other industrial areas. Somebody asked me the question as to, how do you start drawing the map? And I said that, the way I started was actually in the southwest corner. And then you move out from there, and you have to, it's the other day, the guy was painting our porch and I was watching him, and he was making sure that by the time he got that, he didn't paint himself in the corner so that he'd had to walk over the fresh paint to get to the steps. And map drawing is a little bit the same. So, we started in the corner that was the least able to connect any other place, which is the southwest corner, and then drew out from there. And that's just an example of how we try to avoid cutting off people because of natural barriers. Map development process, listen to your public input, watch the emails come in, and consulted with staff here in the village. I spent a lot of time driving around, so I would acquaint myself and reacquaint myself with Skokie. I grew up in the area, started out in grade school in Skokie, ended up in Wilmette. My sister lives in Skokie. I have another sister live in Wilmette, so I'm aware of the area, but I would spend some time driving around just to confirm what my knowledge is of the community and things, things have changed. And then from the last meeting, took suggestions and attempt to see how they worked out. So you may recall last time we had 3 maps. We labeled them Orchard, Prairie, and Marsh. Along that same pattern, we decided to go with Forest as the final proposed map. Of all the maps, this actually had the best population, the narrowness in difference on populations. So the differential is one district is only 0.6% or 6 people above the ideal. And then the district that is the smallest is only 1.1% from the ideal. Where this difference, what we did since the last time, so we thought that Orchard was a good base map to work from. And the changes that we made were largely in, I didn't bring my pointer, but at the top of 4, you see this trapezoidal kind of area. Originally in Orchard, it was a rectangle that went all the way up to Dempster along the western edge. So it took this area west of Lockwood all the way up to Dempster and put it into the 4. What we did here was we flattened it a bit and follow the natural boundaries of Grosse Pointe Road on the west, the Yellow Line Terminal Road actually on the east, and then carried through the line of Greenleaf. Greenleaf is the boundary that separates 2 from 3 on the east end. And so we use Greenleaf again as the boundary between 1 and 4, feeling that there was some consistency to that. Again, when you're talking to people, you could say, look, if you live south of Greenleaf, you're in one district, north of Greenleaf in the other. And it doesn't seem so odd, in the fact that we've used it in 2 places. There was another request, and I tried hard to make this thing work. And that is that there are a group of multifamily residences in the area. Oh, let me back up. So one of the things that we did accomplish in this map is connect the multifamily apartments and condos that are west of Skokie Boulevard, and we kept them in District 1. There was a request that we look at following that same principle and go on the other side of Skokie Boulevard and pick up the area between Skokie, Niles Center, and move that over to District 1 and Grosse Pointe Road. So it's Grosse Pointe Road, Niles Center, and Skokie Boulevard. What that did, though, was that it created such a large population shift that it pinwheeled throughout the entire map. And a lot of the things that we were comfortable with in terms of following our basic principles were getting undone in the process. So it would have accomplished one objective in terms of the multifamily dwellings, but it would actually have really undermined other basic principles that we were using for the entire map. And when you think about this, you need to think about the whole thing and not just about one or two principles by themselves. One other comment was about keeping school districts somewhat contained within, so they weren't dividing them up. We were able to do that with this in 4 districts. The Skevinson portion, or the Skokie portion of the district that laps into Evanston, all of that is contained in District 2. 73, 73 and a half are in District 3, and the Fairview district is in District 4. There are actually more than 2 districts, but 2 districts with large populations in Skokie. Those got divided, but it's frankly a function of where they are. And once you start evening out populations, you start to bust some of those boundaries. So we tried very hard to keep things contained as best as possible, but it's not perfect. And people are distributed in a lumpy way. So those are the differences from the other maps. Again, we I did listen to the comments. I thought the ideas were great. Did try to accommodate them, but when you're drawing these things, you try to stay with the big picture and see if you've achieved the whole of what you want to accomplish. One other thing before I leave, I'm going to ask Evan Breedlove to stand up. Evan is part of my team. He lives in Ireland, so he was shipping the maps back and forth to me. So all the great looking maps and so forth is their Evan's work. So, but thank you very much. And then I guess I give it back to John.
This slide just summarizes some of the data from the 4 districts. And I just wanted to highlight the next steps. We're looking forward to any comments that people have tonight and after tonight. We'll be collecting those comments through October 27th. And then the team will be working through those and putting together the final proposal. And then that will be that final implementation proposal that will go to the village board, will be part of the board packet that's published on the village's website on November 2nd, on that Thursday prior to the Monday board meeting on November the 6th. And so the implementation proposal will be presented to the village board at the board meeting on November the 6th. And then on December 4th, at that board meeting, there will be additional consideration by the village board and the scheduled approval of the implementation plan. And so that's the process moving forward. And with that, I will turn it back over to Meredith.
Great. First, I would like to say thank you, gentlemen, for all of your hard work and your attention to detail on this. It's really been terrific. And now we will be opening up the floor to the audience to ask questions or to provide some feedback before the proposed plan goes to the village board on November 6th. As with the prior meetings, we are asking speakers to limit their comments to 3 minutes and to give everyone an opportunity to speak before approaching the microphone for a second time. So if anyone wishes to speak, there's someone lining up already, but you can line up against this wall and I will meet you down there. And I'm actually going to stop the share so that if we have people watching online, they will be able to see. All right, great. If you would like to step up, please introduce yourself before you start speaking.
You're going to hold it. Okay. Good evening. My name is Judy Mendel, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Skokie Alliance for Electoral Reform, the nonpartisan grassroots ballot initiative committee that crafted and circulated these referendums. Thank you for your continued progress listening to residents' comments and questions and creating an electoral reform FAQ. I really liked that on the website. And thank you again for proposing a plan to combine staggered terms and hybrid representation that aligns with the Alliance's recommendations and the intent of the reforms. We're pleased to see the progress involving the public in this process, and we ask you to please continue making progress toward greater inclusion and transparency in this process. To that end, we ask that you please expand the village's public education efforts to ensure Skokie voters and potential candidates fully understand the new electoral system. Specifically, we suggest disseminating clear information about the referendums for voters in various formats, languages, locations, such as public meetings in person and remotely, in the village's print and electronic news, on the village's website, etc. You could create another video similar to the one you created for the mapping process, which was great, with answers to frequently asked questions about the referendums. You could create a guide for potential candidates for the new process for filing. And we ask you to please utilize the expertise of the Alliance in the public education effort. The members of the Alliance crafted these referendums and had conversations with over 4,000 Skokie residents. We know the questions asked very well and have clear, succinct answers, and we are eager to work with the village to spread the word about these upcoming changes. It's very important to the healthy functioning of our democracy that voters understand our system and that we clear up any misunderstandings. Although I think you guys have done a good job so far. Finally, we request that you post online all the written comments that you have received about the electoral referendums As public comments, they should be accessible by the public for transparency and inclusion. They are a matter of public record, and identifying information could easily be excluded. Identifying information of the commenters could easily be excluded from public posts. It will open up the process and increase trust if the public can see each other's comments and see how public comments were integrated into the proposed maps and implementation plan. After all, these comments can be FOIA'd, so why not make them public and easily accessible? Thank you for listening to and integrating the public's comments thus far. We hope to see continued progress with public education and transparency, and we look forward to working together to educate residents on the new electoral system. Thank you.
Thank you. Step right up. Please introduce yourself before you begin speaking.
Okay, I apologize if this has already been addressed, but I was wondering, you're submitting it for the final village approval on December 4th. What if the village board doesn't approve it? I doubt that would happen, but
Right, the mayor and the board delegated the responsibility of implementing the referendum to the village manager, to me, for a professional implementation. And so they're expecting a presentation on the proposal and to consider, for them to consider it and to ultimately approve the referendum. And so that's their responsibility to consider the proposal and to vote on it.
you said it would take 5 candidates to trigger a primary. Is that correct?
Or why don't you go ahead and take this one to answer the question, and then I'll.
That would be correct for the district-based trustee positions as well as for the mayor, but it'll be a different calculation for the at-large positions because you're going to be voting for 2. So it'd actually be 2 times 4, 8. So if 9 for those filed, then you would have a primary to whittle it down because there would be 2 positions that are
Just
available.
Ukraine, you're willing to have 4 candidates in April, but you're only willing to have 2 candidates. There are 5 candidates. Like the top 2 would advance, right?
No, it's 4. It would be 4. It'd be 8 in the circumstance of the at-large trustees, and it would be 4 on the ballot for the district and the mayor and the clerk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please step up and state your name before you begin speaking.
I am Patricia Urbanus from the Bobolink area. Thank you for your thoughtful presentation and all of your work. I have a question regarding the term, the length of the term. The purpose of staggered terms is so that you have part of the group with experience and part of the group new. And my question is, why did you choose to have the 4 district trustees in one rotation and the at-large trustees in the other? I submit perhaps it might be more efficient for 2 of the districts to be on one rotation with 1 trustee at large. Now, I know this is a problem of implementation, but unfortunately, they could draw lots.
All right. Thank you. If you would, excuse me, sir, if you would like to speak, you can get into line and come up to the microphone to speak. Yes.
Ma'am? Ma'am? Are you listening?
Yep.
No, the woman will answer the question. Just want to make sure you're ready for the answer. So it could be done either way, potentially. There is a more natural relationship between the 4 district elected officials, both in terms of the potential confusion in the minds of the voters regarding at-large candidates and some of the district trustees running at the same election versus an election where all of the individuals that will be segregated by district are part of the pool that are being voted on versus the mayor, the clerk, and the two at-large trustees running together so that the voters, all of the voters at one time know they're voting for those four candidates at the same time. So the position at this point is that is a more logical composition for the election process for the voters to avoid, basically to avoid confusion to the greatest extent possible. Okay.
All right, next, please introduce yourself before you begin speaking.
Hi, my name is Marla Miller. I've been in Skokie for the past 30 years. It's a very well-run village, very democratic. I personally didn't think that the system was broken. Having said that, I really appreciate all the time and effort and expertise that you're bringing to the table in revising it in response to the referendum. And I do feel, though, that it wasn't a broken system. And if it's not broken, you don't go and fix it. But, you know, it is a democratic place. And therefore, you did, you know, give it to the public to make a decision. And so I do appreciate all of your expertise in putting together the plan and listening to the public.
Thank you. Sir, if you would like to step up, please introduce yourself before you begin speaking. I can.
Okay. I'm Father Henry Krechek. I'm the retired pastor of Saints Peter and Lambert Church here in Skokie. And I'm just wondering if access to public services will be directed through the now local ward boss, if you will, or the local trustee, or will services be available in a general way as they have been?
The services will not be impacted. The village operates under a council manager form of government. And so the village elects the trustees and the mayor and the village clerk, and then they hire the village manager to run the day-to-day operation. And so the day-to-day operations providing the services, of course, are set by the vision of the elected officials, but the day-to-day service delivery is the responsibility of the manager. And that was not part of the referendum. And so there's no intent for the services to change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Please step up and introduce yourself.
Oh, great. I'm Gary Hoberman. How are you? There's an easy one for you. I just want, when you have the staggered elections, do one of the two elections line up with the federal elections, like for president?
They do not. The cycle for municipal elections is actually the odd years every 2 years, and the general election lands in November of even years.
Give me an easy one.
Thank you. Before we have our next speaker up, is there somebody else who would like to say something? All right, fine. While we're waiting, you can come up. Go ahead.
Just one of the previous comments just shows why I think continued public education is important, because the term wards is still being used in its districts, and on your FAQs, which are great, people should be directed to those because it shows that village services are not going to be impacted. The district trustees don't have their own budgets or anything. It's going to stay the same. I'm just curious, on page 4 of the sheet, number I says, I think this is great. I'm just curious about something. Each trustee elected from an election district, while a champion for their district, carries the solemn responsibility of upholding the welfare, growth, and development of the village as a whole. I think that's great. I'm hopeful that the district trustees will do that. One thing I'm curious of is this is a legal thing in an ordinance. If an at-large trustee or any of the trustees think a district trustee isn't upholding the welfare, growth, and development of the village as a whole, does something happen? Can they be, I don't know, can it be discussed at a meeting? I mean, I'm curious how that, something that's sort of subjective is in an ordinance, that's all.
This language is included here, and I think it goes to maybe the gentleman's question about the responsibilities or role of an elected official from each one of the 4 districts. This is not, I'm sure we all tend to refer to the city of Chicago when we think about wards and how the city of Chicago operates. That is not the system that is being implemented in Skokie. The system being implemented here does not authorize any individual district elected trustee to take any particular action or make any particular decision on their own with independent authority. The body acts by majority vote, the council. So this is not the situation you may see in Chicago where an alderman has some authority over their particular ward operations. This remains a council operated village, and decisions are made by majority vote of the members of the city council, of the board of trustees.
Right. So I understand that, because obviously if there's one trustee who just really wants something for their district, they'd have to get more trustees to, vote for that. It would be more of a consensus or whatnot. But my question was, just, you know what I mean? Like this, if somebody's thinking that somebody's not upholding, well, okay, whatever. It's
Right,
okay.
so
I'm just curious.
so this
It seems
statement
very
do-
subjective to
Right.
be in this, but
This
I agree
statement-
with it.
sure, and it's in there for that reason, that the body itself, the governing body, acts by majority vote, not by any individual authority granted to a particular trustee.
Okay, that's what this says.
That is the intention of this statement, to remind the residents of the village of Skokie that remains the case. Okay,
All right, ma'am, if you'd like to step up now. Please introduce yourself before you begin speaking. Step all the way so we can get you.
Hi, I'm Amita Bhargav, and I've been a resident of Skokie for the past 12 years or so. And I've been here for several election cycles. And so I had 2 comments. First off, this would be the first time I'm hoping that candidates will actually be knocking on people's doors to say, vote for me, this is what I'm planning to do for you, or this is what I promised to do for you, which has never happened in Skokie since the time I have been here. Nobody's come to my door and said, hey, I'm a candidate for being, so and so. Vote for me, I will do this for your district. So the mapping should hopefully help with that. So there should be no confusion in a voter's mind as to who he or she is voting for, because they've met all the candidates in person. Secondly, if you have the 4 main, more powerful positions, that is of the mayor, the village clerk, and the 2 at-large trustees, go for 4-year cycles, there's no way we can replace them quickly enough. What if it's not a good fit? Then we still have to wait for another 4 years before we can say, oh, now we can perhaps have a better candidate. So that's my concern about you saying that those 4 positions are going to go every 4 years. Why cannot they be also staggered one way or another?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of your question? Why can they not?
Why can they not be staggered for a 2-year election system where they also go up for 2 years?
Well, so the referendum questions that were posed to the voters of Skokie and were voted on and are now in effect, provided that each of the elected officials upon election would serve a 4-year term. So the village does not have the legal authority to change that decision that the voters made. So you do have 2-year election cycles where you're going to be electing 4 officials at large, the mayor, the clerk, 2 of the trustees who run at large and represent the whole village. Or all the trustees represent the whole village, but they specifically are elected from the entire village. And the other 2-year cycle is the election of those 4 elected trustees from each of the districts. So you are electing different representatives every 2 years. They just have a different status.
I think it makes sense now, and maybe we need more education on that.
Okay.
And lastly, I want to thank you for coming up with 3 maps instead of 1. That had bothered me really. The first time when you all presented your plan to have only 1 map. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Hi there. Please give us your name and then begin speaking.
Sure. Ryan McLaughlin. First of all, thanks for all your work. I think it's and the educational component of it that's been really helpful. And regarding comparing Skokie to Chicago, frankly, I think Skokie does a lot of things much better than Chicago. So I hope we can prevent devolving into their system of city government. Second of all, I wonder, I understand the sort of straightforward nature of having the at-large candidates in one election and then the district ones in another, but I want to push back a little bit on that just because, you know, we as voters, we make our way through all kinds of other complicated, staggered election seats. And I mean, that's education. We figured out, I think there really is something to be said for the, for example, having a mayor, 1 at large, and 2 district appointees on one, you know, slate, and then 2 years later having the clerk, 1 at large and 2 district on the other. In terms of sort of a corporate overlay and continuity, you know, one of the concerns that was frequently voiced was, well, we could have a whole new slate of X every 4 years that would have to learn from scratch. That would help with that. Just putting that out there. And maybe this is already addressed and it wouldn't change with trustees, but what happens if an at-large trustee resigns or somehow unable to continue? You know, how are they replaced?
The mayor recommends a replacement candidate to fill a vacancy with the advice and consent of the remainder of the board, of the other elected officials. Sure. If there is a vacancy on the board of trustees in one of the offices, the mayor has the authority to recommend the appointment of a new individual that qualifies to fill the seat. And the rest of the council provides their advice and consent. Essentially, they approve that appointment or they turn it down and another individual would be recommended.
Right. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Alanka Ulrich, and I want to say that Skokie does conduct themselves better than Chicago. But in the last 2 elections, I think you've noticed a little bit of like negative campaigning going on. And I've been working with ex-representative Denise Stonebeck on its code of fair and campaign practices. It's a Illinois pledge to conduct yourself with integrity, and it's a voluntary pledge. And I ask that every voter look at this, contact Denise Stonebeck or myself, Alanka Ulrich. I can further explain and ask that every candidate running take this pledge. While it's voluntary, we could hold them accountable for ugly campaign practices. I think that we need to stop that in Skokie. I know that's not related to what we're talking about today, but we are talking about elections. Please consider that.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself before you begin speaking.
I am John Domke. I've been my wife and I have lived in Skokie for 38 years, and we're very happy with the village. But I do excuse me, I do have 2 questions. One, is there a requirement that the representative for each of the districts be a representative of the district, that they physically live in the district, or just that they are a resident of Skokie and they're representing a particular district?
As to the first question, I don't know if you had another question. Yes, the district elected officials from District 1, 2, 3, and 4 must be resident in that district to run for office and serve.
Thank you. And then the other question is, I know 2030 is a long time away, but is it contemplated that when the 2030 census comes out, the map will be revisited and adjusted if necessary?
Yes, hopefully Pete will still be with us to assist the village if any changes are needed. Every 10 years after the census, municipalities that operate on a district basis or ward basis are required to revisit their population numbers for each of the districts to make sure they remain in in compliance with Illinois law.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any more comments from the audience? It looks like we don't. So I would like to take a moment just to say thank you for all of your participation, not just tonight, but throughout the entire process. Your input and insights have helped us to craft an implementation plan that we are proud to present to the village board. Thank you and good night.